Today on WizardCast,
Last time on the WizardCast.
Mark, what the heck was that? You interrupted me 2 episodes in a row?
I thought that wasn't me. That was the narrator.
You control the editing, Mark. That had to be you. Besides, we don't have a narrator.
Yeah, of course we do. He recaps what happened on our last episode every week.
We're not a soap opera or a cliffhanger of Star Trek.
Last time on the WizardCast.
Actually, I did get interrupted last time on the WizardCast, so yeah, that works, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm Brian Kwong.
And I'm Mark Ross.
We're Salesforce experts that love talking about technology and Salesforce.
We also love humor. Doesn't mean we're actually good at it.
In the Salesforce community, I'm known as the Salesforce Wizard, likely due to me wearing a wizard hat at Salesforce events.
And I'm known as Salesforce Yoda for pretty much the same reason.
You should see the ears.
We have a passion to help educate and entertain people.
So we've joined forces to create WizardCast.
We've got tips and best practices.
We talk with interesting people.
All mixed with quote-unquote jokes and humor.
Welcome
to
the
WizardCast.
WizardCast. So, seriously, no joke?
How about random trivia instead?
That breaks the format, but fine. Whatever, go ahead.
It's a new year, Brian. We should experiment with new changes in our format, right? See what else works.
Changes
Instead
are
of just
scary.
Change is a force for good. Maybe, I don't know. I heard that somewhere. Anyway, random trivia. Did you know that Shakespeare used to sell off-season camping gear?
I did not know that.
Yeah. It was the winter of his discount tents.
Huh. I see what you did there. So this snuck a joke in.
Right when you least expected it. I'm like a joke assassin.
Yeah, though you think back in Shakespeare's time, tents would be more expensive in the winter because people would want the shelter since, they didn't use camping as a recreational activity.
Brian, it was a joke, Brian.
Which would mean that in this winter time, that wouldn't be the off season.
Brian.
And
Brian.
It would be kind of like an all season tent.
You know what a joke is, right?
Sure, I get jokes.
Right.
WizardCast is brought to you by the great people at...
You said no more fake sponsors.
Look, Mark, I'm sorry. I'm obligated.
Obligated to who?
WizardCast is brought to you by the great people at the secret organization that watches and listens to everything you say with...
What was that?
The sponsor spot.
That's a really weird and ominous sponsor, Brian. Maybe we shouldn't get more support from them in the future?
We will see.
Right.
Yes.
Are you... Okay, nod if you can't say anything otherwise.
That doesn't really work in an audio format.
No, it doesn't. Okay. Moving on then. So what are we going to talk about today?
We're going to talk about what we're going to talk about on the podcast later this year.
Okay. That sounds like you're not prepared for this episode.
No,
Brian.
Mark, it's called a teaser episode. You tell people what you're going to do later to get them to want to tune in to a future episode.
Right.
Yes. Like talking about the different deployment methods and their pros and cons.
So we're going to talk about deployments now, right?
No, we're going to talk about it then. This is now. We'll talk about that then.
How about we just go ahead and talk about it actually right now?
No, that will make now then, and it's now, not then. I mean, it'll cause a rip in the space-time continuum, and it's already a big ball of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff.
Brian, this is not an episode of Nerd Force.
And cue the interview with John Graff.
We haven't had that interview yet.
Right, because this is now. We'll talk about John then. Teaser episode.
Okay, now we're getting into time travel. How about we just go ahead and talk about deployments? Screw the space-time continuum.
Fine. IDE, Ant, and chain sets. Done.
What?
IDE, Ant, and chain sets.
That's a horribly reductive oversimplification of some ridiculous issues, difficulties Not to mention the fact that you're leaving out entire categories of possibilities.
What am I leaving out?
Okay. Well, where do we start? Should we talk about change sets first? Let's talk about good old fashioned change sets.
They're not really old fashioned. I mean, they're fairly recent. I mean, out of the three items that I listed, we've had the IDE and Ant far longer than we've had change sets.
I didn't actually know
Change sets
that.
have only been around a couple years, 2-3 years maybe.
No, change sets have been around since I started as an admin.
They're still fairly recent because they didn't exist when I started as an admin in 2007.
It was 8 years ago.
Still not as old as Ant and IDE.
Okay, all right.
Like I said, big ball of wibbly wobbly timey wimey stuff.
That's interesting. I always assumed that actually Ant came later because I learned about it later, I guess. So change sets are a thing, but a lot of people don't use them.
Well,
for a lot of reasons, yes?
I use them. I mean, on one hand, they're declarative, which is really nice. You don't have to learn anything really outside of the Salesforce. It's built into your Salesforce org. But they are a pain to put together.
Oh my God, yes.
I use them only in two functions. The first one is small deployments, like you're making a single field change, you're making or doing a new page or a single custom or something really, really tightly compact, or as part of a larger deployment where you're building the chain set as you're doing the configuration work, because that's the only real way to do it. If you try to do a huge project and then try to put a chain set together, it is an awful painful experience. Plus, you can't deploy standard fields.
Yeah,
don't know why. Just can't.
It's one of a few things that you can't really do. So you talked about for a single field update. I'm going to play devil's advocate here and mention what I think probably a lot of admins do, and that is, why bother with a change set when you can just swivel chair it? Just literally manually copy over the small field change, the likely to be small field change, because it'll take less time to just manually do it in another org than it is to build the change set, wait for the change set to upload, wait for it to deploy.
And my response is because time is not the only consideration you have to make. You're right. I admit I'm tempted to do the same thing. However, there is something to be said with using a deployment method that's not a manual copy and paste or manual reentry, because those functions can be error prone. And the last thing you want to do is have something perfectly done in Sandbox and then introduce an error because you decided not to use the time to do a deployment method like chain sets.
And I see where you're coming from. It's a good point. I have a counter that is another, what I feel is a good point. Let's say it's for a field creation. Simple field too. Let's say it's just a text area, right?
Sure.
Nothing special to it whatsoever. Name, description, help text. That's pretty much it, right?
Sure.
When you create that field with the UI, it automatically does a lot of things for you, or at least walks you through them. Setting field level permissions, it puts it on the layout, and if you were to use a deployment, a change set deployment for that, you don't get those things.
Not
it comes
true.
over naked.
Not true.
It doesn't come over on the page layout. I mean, you have to remember to put it on the page layout.
You have to.
in the change set.
You have to deploy the page layout, right? And you have to include the profiles in the change set so they deploy with the field level settings.
And yes,
right?
That's fine, unless you're in the middle of building something else. So your layout that comes over has fields in it that you aren't deploying right now.
Then you are not using a very good deployment method.
Nah. Well, but that's good to talk about. That's good to know. So what's the alternative? Because in a world where people have limited sandboxes, like one full sandbox is really all we get, right?
That's a terrible excuse. One, it's only a full sandbox for people who actually are on unlimited or higher. For folks who are on enterprise, we actually only get a partial sandbox, which is not the same thing. But we
Fair
do
enough,
get
but it's
25 full sandboxes. Okay, and I'm sorry, I misspoke. You get 25 developer sandboxes.
Yeah, okay.
Now, but here's the thing. Okay, if you're in a really big organization, you should be doing different projects in the different developer sandboxes and using your partial or full sandbox as kind of like a pre-production test, where it's really the things that you are getting ready to deploy into production that is in there. You should not have anything there that is needing to be deployed outside of your deployment schedule.
So let me give you a scenario. A company with an admin team, literally no less than 8 admins, all doing separate work with one actual full sandbox, which is quite a few people do have. Quite a few people pay for the full sandbox.
I like to see your stats on that. But anyways, go on.
So in that scenario, you have people who are pushing work.
Then you are not working on a consistent deployment schedule. You have 8 admins who are working independently. It's different.
You're talking about at that point, like not necessarily agile, but something like it, where you have essentially deployment dates.
I'm talking about actually having a methodology to the company's deployment plans. Now let's use that example as an excuse. Not a problem, because ideally what you should be able to do then is, even though in my opinion you should be going from your dev sandbox to your partial full, and then from your partial full to your production org, in that one situation, if you get to the point where you go, hey, partial is okay, was successful, your full copy was successful, it's working and it's valid, but you don't want to deploy the same object to page load because it's going to cause issues because someone else is working on the same object for some strange reason outside of your deployment schedule, then deploy from your developer sandbox. Because your developer sandbox should be kept up to date. There's no excuse. There's no excuse.
Gasp. But that's going outside of the strict methodologies of...
Which you don't have because you have 8 different admins doing their own thing across different objects.
Make up your mind, Brian. Make up your mind. Go with it or don't go with it.
No, I'm saying that the ideal world, in the ideal world, you have a strict methodology that you're following, and you are saying, well, no, Brian, that doesn't work because you can have 8 different admins, and I'm saying then you don't have that strict methodology. You might as well go ahead and deploy from your developer sandbox to get around your issue.
No, I fair enough. I'm just playing admin's advocate here, but. I mean, the reality is there are a lot of admins out there.
Yes.
These are solo admins.
Yes.
And they work on a Salesforce org that has less than 100 users.
Sure.
They're expected to turn out fairly quick work because Salesforce is quick to work in. And while I would never condone doing work directly in production, I can't say I've never done it, but I don't condone it. It is a very much a reality where people
sure, especially if you're on professional edition,
manually create things instead. Yeah, professional edition. So a lot of this entire episode is like just for enterprise and higher, isn't it? If we're talking about deployments,
well, because copy and pasting is an option.
It's a reality.
It's not a good option. It's a reality. It doesn't make it good.
Yeah.
And
we still love you.
I've been in that position as being that solo admin that has the expectation of, hey, it's Salesforce, it's in the cloud, you just should be able to do things fast. And while you're able to do things fast, there's a difference between doing things fast, doing things correct, and doing things safe. And when you do things for the sake of speed only, you run the risk of errors. There's a reason why deployment options exist, and there's a reason why everyone says do things in your sandbox. It's not a question of speed up front. It's a question of doing things safely. And you may go through many times where your copy and paste method or redoing everything in production has no problems whatsoever. And then you do the one time where you make a mistake, and instead you end up spending tons of extra time, more than it would have taken had you followed the regular procedure to try to correct your mistake, or worse, fixing the mistakes that were caused due to your mistake. For example, having tons of people put in bad data because you put in an incorrect field, or losing data because you changed a permission, or heavens forbid you deleted a field you didn't mean delete. There's a reason why you choose a deployment methodology. And you know what? I think that's an entirely different episode.
I don't know. I think we've covered it pretty well. And now that we've more or less exhausted the topic and made our audience feel bad about themselves, let's talk a bit about Ant and IDE, because they kind of go hand in hand.
They're similar.
You
and
could do the
different.
IDE without Ant, but I don't think you can do Ant very well without the IDE. I don't think that works.
I've only used Ant once. To be honest, I don't use Ant. I've not used Ant all that often. I found
Okay,
the
let's
IDE was
backtrack.
a lot easier to use.
Yeah. Well, let's backtrack. Let's identify what these things actually are, because people might not know.
So what does
So
IDE stand for?
The IDE is something development environment. What is it? Integrated?
I have no idea. I was putting you on the spot.
Interactive? Icicle.
I think it stands for My
Interocitor.
Developer Environment.
That doesn't make sense.
Yeah, my spelled M-I.
My DE. The thing. So what this is it's also known as Eclipse with the four-stop font.
Or not necessarily.
The force.com.
You got Maven's
Okay,
Main and Sublime.
sure,
IDE
that's true.
is a developer resource that usually gets snapped onto a platform.
Right. And what it allows, people think of these things as being code resources, and admins can use them. They're actually incredibly valuable to admins, because what you can do is you can take all the objects, all the workflow, all the flow, all the practically anything that's in the system. There are things that are not in the system. They're not accessible via this, things that aren't specified in the metadata IDE. But you can pull down all this information into the program in the form of XML documents. And so you can see everything that's there. You can look and search throughout all of your fields. You can look and search throughout all of your workflow to see, this field, when I change this field, what happens? Well, you can go search for it and find out. So it's incredibly valuable. And one of the things you can also do after you've pulled down all that data, you can actually edit directly in there and then push it back up. And you can push. So let's say you actually connect the IDE to your developer org, to your sandbox. You make the changes there. You push it up to the sandbox. You test it. It looks good. It works. You go through UAT or whatever process you have to. You can then, even though you pulled down from your sandbox originally, you can then redeploy to production directly from the IDE.
Or another sandbox. Or even another org.
Or another sandbox.
So
it's another way of pushing the same stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I've used the IDE for grabbing metadata from one org to put it into a completely different customer's org. I've also had the situation where a customer went through and said, I really love the fields that you put on this object, but we decided we really want those fields on this other object. And if you were going to do this manually, you would have to go through and manually delete the fields and recreate them. But with the IDE, I went and literally copied and pasted from the XML, which is what that metadata information is, and from one object to the other object, and saved, and voila. In a matter of, a minute and a half, I probably did a couple hours worth of work that would have been done manually. So they can be really great tools, even for administrators. And I think there's been even some Dreamforce sessions that kind of cover.
Oh yeah, there definitely have
cover that.
And it is befall into the same problems that if it's on a page layout, if it's mentioned in profiles, you have to push those as well. It doesn't do any hand holding of that or assumptions there.
You can deploy, for example, field only and not the page layout. The field will go with the field level settings. You don't even have to deploy with the.
Well,
deploy
that
the
may be a
profiles.
Maven's Mate thing, because I don't believe Eclipse does that.
No, I've done it with Eclipse. You can deploy.
Really?
Yeah, you can deploy a single field if you wanted to.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I had never figured that out. I've done it with Ant, which we'll get to in a moment.
I'll show you sometime. And I realized we forgot an option.
We did.
Yeah.
You
can create a package from one environment and install it in the other.
Yeah, if you want it to be in a package. Can we talk about the cons of packages before we really get people excited about packages?
I've only used it once, and quite honestly, it was such a royal pain in the backside to do it.
Yeah. So, I mean, creating them is like a change set, but worse. And I believe once it's deployed, you have difficulty editing it. Isn't that right? Or am I just thinking of managed packages?
You're thinking of managed packages.
Okay. All right. So at least that's not there.
Yeah.
I know there are difficulties though, just in general. It's not fun.
No, but it's an option.
There are certain interactions. Things won't get packaged correctly from time to time. Certain things you package it and then it doesn't actually include everything you thought it did.
Yeah, I mean,
It's
that's the worst
interesting.
case. I mean, in the series, like with chain sets in the IDE, let's say you go through, you went to deploy, and it says, hey, your deployment failed because you forgot something. Well, with the chain set, you can go into and clone the chain set, add the one item that you're missing, upload the new chain set. With the IDE, you go, oh, that's stupid, and you just re-highlight the items that you want to deploy, including the one that you missed, and
whoops,
re-hit the
typo.
deploy
That should be an I, not an O. Fix, redeploy. Yeah, you don't have to do everything else.
Right.
That's involved. All right. So Ant I've used actually. I used it technically. I used it once, but that one time was one big project in which I used it about 20 times. And what Ant is, it is a text. What is it? Command line interface for deploying assets and downloading assets. By assets, I mean things like XML objects and workflow and all the other same components you pull down with the IDE. And it does allow you to specify. One of the ways that it's very valuable is it allows you to basically save configurations of what you're pushing up. So you can actually put together a file that says upload these objects, these workflows, these profiles, and then that is saved in a specific folder as a certain configuration. So
kind of like how a chain set's saved.
Exactly. But it's saved locally on your machine. So you can keep making attempt at as you make changes, patch things up. It's kind of best of both worlds.
Think, no hard drive trash, no hard drive
yeah,
trash.
Exactly. Well, I mean,
please may I remember my laptop on the bus.
But it's kind of is the best of both worlds. But the problem is it is working with XML files, so you usually need to use something like Eclipse or Maven's or some other IDE to pull down the XML so that you then can use the Ant to work with it.
I think you can actually also use the developer workbench to pull down metadata too.
Yeah,
I've done that a couple times.
Have you? Okay.
Yeah.
Now, we've exhausted the options that are standard Salesforce. There's more.
No, there's not.
Yes, there are.
No, there's not.
Because there are third parties, Brian.
Well, I never get invited to parties. I don't know why. I'm told I have a very exciting, stellar attitude.
Maybe it's because every time you go, you end up naked?
I've never ended up naked at a party.
That you remember.
Why would I not remember it? I don't drink. I don't do drugs. How would I have forgotten?
Uh-huh. Sure.
All right, fine. Let's assume that you're correct and there's these, quote, third parties, unquote.
Okay. Yes.
Do I have to pay for these third parties? Is there an admission fee?
Nope, you got to pay.
Well,
so,
why would I want to pay?
Because they're nice.
I have at least
they're
3
sweet.
4 good tools that are free.
Okay, they're good tools, but they're not great tools.
But they're free.
And let's be honest. You talk to almost anybody in the community, and you mention the word change sets, and they shudder. Because everybody has had bad experiences with them. That's just...
Mufasa.
Yeah, exactly. So one of them that I've had good experience with is called GearSet. And GearSet is essentially an interface that lets you do comparisons between orgs. And they don't even have to be orgs that are related to each other. Once you run the comparison, it will show you all the various pieces of metadata, all the fields, all the profiles, everything that have changes, and it'll identify those things that are different and then allow you to push from one to the other.
Does it allow you to do a negative update? Like,
I don't know what you mean by negative update, but it does let you do rollbacks.
I have pickless values. I'm deleting pickless values from one environment.
Destructive changes.
Yeah, destructive change.
Yes, it does destructive changes, which I believe is something that change sets don't do.
Well, with pickless values, you can have them deactivate.
Yeah,
but
you can't delete a field.
Because you can't add a deleted field to a chain set.
You can do that with Ant. You can do destructive changes. That's another advantage over chain sets that Ant has. But yeah, all the third-party tools can do destructive changes.
And what was the name of that tool?
GearSet. It lets you maintain histories of everything that you've worked with.
And GearSet, if you're interested in a sponsor spot, please contact Brian at thewizardnews.com.
It also lets you do version control. It does integrate with Bitbucket or GitHub.
Oh, that's cool. And what's Bitbucket and GitHub?
They are, oh God, I can't even explain those things. I know what they are, but I can't put words
It's
to them.
a place to store stuff.
To store code, to store text,
your metadata.
really, but code or metadata, exactly. So it's basically you can use it to store different versions of all your metadata. You can actually set GearSet to on a daily basis take a snapshot of all of your metadata XML and store it in GitHub so that you have literally like a running count of everything that's there.
Okay.
So it's pretty nice.
That's GearSet. What else?
That's GearSet. There's also Copado. I've only worked a little bit with Copado, but I know of a specific MVP who goes by Carlos, who is a big fan of Copado. He's had lots of good dealings with them.
Oh, yeah.
And it is a very similar tool. GearSet is, to get to it, you go through GearSet's website. Copado, all the work you do in Copado is actually in your Salesforce org, so it is completely Salesforce native. It actually has more features than GearSet does, but by and large, it's mostly the same. It has a little bit different interface the graphical interface for how you choose the fields, which incidentally, both of these tools have search interfaces. So you can actually find all of the fields across all the objects that contain certain text, like CCB, if you're deploying something for call center breaks. I don't know.
Well, Copado sounds interesting and pretty cool. Okay. What's the next one?
They're both great tools. The third one is done by Dream Factory, and it's called Snapshot. And I'm not personally a fan of Dream Factory because I don't like proprietary browser plugins, but I know that Cheryl Feldman is a huge fan of Snapshot. So awesome. A lot of people really like Snapshot. It is probably just as capable, if not more so, than both of the other two. And there are others as well. Flowsum is one that some people use. AutoRabbit is a name you'll find on the App Exchange. I don't know anything about them. There are tools out there.
Why do I feel like we're really missing out on sponsor deals right now?
Because you'd rather get fake sponsors, Brian.
It's more because I'm too lazy to go contact real people and say, hey, I have a podcast with approximately 120 people who listens to it. Would you give me money to cover my expenses?
You know how ridiculous that sounds?
Yeah. Well, who do you think you are, a button-click admin?
Oh. No, I'm hurt. So yeah, I think that's pretty much extended those options. If you guys are interested in anything like any of those third parties, tell them WizardCast sent you. We won't get anything from it, but maybe if they get enough people, they'll be like, "Who the hell are these guys?"
I'm really tempted for work actually to contact some of them and say, "Hey, I heard about you guys from the WizardCast." Just see what happens.
Indeed.
WizardCast is produced by Brian Kwong and Mark Ross, directed by Brian Kwong and Mark Ross, technical administration by Brian Kwong and Mark Ross, script writing by Brian Kwong and Mark Ross, audio editing by Brian Kwong and Mark Ross, website maintenance by Brian Kwong and Mark Ross, by Brian Kwong, and our intern this episode was that nice man in the dark suit and sunglasses standing in the shadowed corner.
Is that who that is? Oh. Send us your interview suggestions, jokes, videos, tips, and feedback to wizardcast@thewizardnews.com or head over to thewizardnews.com and click Contact WizardCast.
Don't forget to subscribe to the WizardCast and receive our next episode automatically. And please leave us a review at whatever place that you listen to your podcastings because it helps people find our podcast. Once again, I'm Brian.
And I can't wait to see what happens in the next episode.
Thanks for listening.
I don't know. I'm making
safe harbor.
I should clip that out.
That so needs to be safe forward.
I'm tired. Shut up.
Hi, tired. I'm Brian, also known as the Salesforce Wizard.